They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, so completely jacking another YouTuber style isn't plagiarism, it's a compliment. The Mark I Toyota MR2, otherwise known as the Aw11. I love mine, it's literally my favorite car, but I bought it on the way to a scrapyard and have very slowly been just making it a little bit less of a disaster. This is a guide to the issues with the Aw11 MR2 you're considering making your next project car. We're not talking about the Concours MR2 on Bring a Trailer for $20,000. No, we are talking about the sketchy MR2s, the $2,000 Craigslist specials, the dream car for those of us with no money and even less sense. As such, we're not worrying about the paint or the interior, although the interior on this one is quite nice. No, beggars can't be choosers. A rattle can paint job or duct tape interior just means that it's a bargain. Rust is the thing that kills all of these cars. The engine and transmission will be purring along happily after the rest of the car has been reduced to dust. Unfortunately, these things rust just by thinking moist thoughts. Expect rust on any old Toyota, it's unavoidable, it's a law of the universe, but there are some deal-breaker rust spots. Surface rust in these areas is okay, but if it's flaky or if you can poke a hole in it, run. The strut towers. These don't usually rust out, but if they do, the rest of the car is probably unsalvageable. So it's an easy spot to check and do them first. They are in the engine bay and the frunk. The suspension mounting points. These also rust out. If the unibody is okay, but the mount is rusted, most of them, especially in the rear, can be replaced, but they are very hard to find. In general, I'd stay away from anything with broken or extremely rusted suspension mounts. It's just not worth it. The next deal breaker is the pinch welds. If these are rusted out, the car's probably done for. This is the structure of the car, and is the main jacking point. Thankfully, they're pretty easy to check. The floor pans also rust out, but those can be cut and welded. I did these when I first started learning to weld, and they are holding up, but I do plan to redo them at some point to make them a lot cleaner. Body panels can be extremely hard to come by, so keep that in mind. I ended up repairing mine with a lot of fiberglass, and they aren't perfect. But this isn't a show car, it's a daily driver. You can find them, and a company in the UK does make fiberglass replacements, but they are expensive and shipping is expensive. Your best bet is to scour junkyards, but these cars are just getting rarer and rarer all the time. I suggest try to salvage what you have. You can buy welded patch panels for the rear quarters, and I wish I knew this before I did this mediocre fiberglass job. Oh well. Glass can also be really hard to come by on this car. You can still get windshields new, but you'll have to do a lot of calling around. I locally found only one place even willing to ship one in. The rest of the glass is a lot more rare. It's not usually broken, but if you do break it, you're kind of screwed. I managed to snag some door glass from a parts car and keep them as spares just in case. These cars are all pushing 40 years old. They leak, they all leak. If yours doesn't leak, it will. Some of these are pretty easy to fix, others you're going to have to ignore. That's okay, we're all guilty of it. Anyway, the easy ones are the cam covers, the oil cooler line, and the oil pan itself. For the cam covers, just take them off and throw on a new gasket. The oil cooler line, you can replace just the hose and tighten the fittings. For the pan, there's a baffle plate between the pan and the block, and you'll need to seal both of them. The previous owner of mine sealed the pan to the baffles, but not the baffles to the block, so it basically had no seal. The next common and also easiest is the distributor O-ring. It's pretty easy to replace. The hard part is putting it back in time afterwards, because you have to take the whole distributor out. So maybe look up how to set distributor timing first before you try this. Next up are the cam and crank seals, aka the front and rear main. These are more of a pain to do. I suggest doing the cam and front of the crank when you have to do the timing belt. To do the rear, you have to remove the transmission, so maybe ignore that one, at least until it's time to do the clutch. The head gasket doesn't usually leak on these engines, so if you suspect a head gasket leak, run. A really common mod I see is a pod filter right under these louvers. This seems like a good idea, to suck nice cold air in right from this hole, but the opposite actually happens. At speed, this area is under vacuum and draws air out, which means that your pod filter is pulling hot air from inside the engine bay. To fix this, you can source a stock air box, you can put one of those ugly barnacle air intakes on, you can cut a hole into the trunk and put the filter in there. the later models actually do this in the factory. Or you can do what I did and take the airbox from my 2005 Echo and hack at it until it fits. I draw air from below the trunk, so it's not a good idea for driving through water, but you shouldn't do that anyway. This isn't the 4Runner. That is. A previous owner also put an oil catch can on this car. I'm not sure why. I removed that, but that's why this tube is clear. If you have the stock wheels, keep them. Everyone tells me they are super cheap on Craigslist, but I can never find them. There are lots of aftermarket options, but you can't really fit bigger wheels, so stick with the 14s. You could get skinny tires, but with roads like ours, you're just begging to dent a rim. I could not find stock wheels, so I got these 4-lug BMW bottle caps. They fit almost perfectly, but you'll need hub centering rings for them. I get a lot of flack for the wheels, but I like them. As for suspension, the good news is you can get pretty much everything you need. There are stock replacements for most things, and when there isn't, there's an aftermarket for it. The bad news is that your suspension is probably thrashed. Every time some teenager wants to know what performance mods to ruin their car with, I always say suspension rebuild. This is not a fast car, and making it fast just makes it into a death trap. No, this car is for cornering, and the way to do that is with good suspension. Be warned though, rust makes this difficult. Replacing my rear shocks resulted in some casualties. An Aw11, especially a cheap one, is a passion project. This is not a car you can just go and buy and drive no worries. You're gonna have to work on it a lot. Parts are hard to find and are expensive. You will cry yourself to sleep some nights wondering if it's worth it, but it is worth it because Neum. But the most important thing is to make sure that some idiot didn't fail to tighten the oil drain and lost all of the oil at high RPM on the highway, completely destroying the crankshaft. Which is what happened to this one. I'm him. I'm that idiot. So stay tuned as I fix my very expensive mistake. What car will I work on next? It's the Charger. It's always the Charger. Anyway, if you like this video, how about hitting subscribe? And if you like the style I stole it from Superfast Matt. His videos are a lot better and you should probably just subscribe to him instead.